All right, this project's become an absolute rabbit hole. Now, here's the mechanism with the gear off and the shaft out. It needs cleaning. Uh, what happened was I took the bridge off. Let's call this a bridge. And it goes across here. It really doesn't do anything. All right. So I took it off. As soon as I took it off, I started looking at the shaft. That's either scratched or the bushing just needs oil. It needs to be cleaned and re-oiled. It's no big deal. But in other words, I looked at it, and I don't know if you could see that little tiny hole through the shaft. And I want to tell you, it's a tapered shaft, a tapered hole. It uses a taper pin. Here's the taper pin over here. Okay? Here's the worm gear. Okay? Shaft goes, you put the worm gear in here, and then you put the shaft through it. And this shaft, even without the worm gear on it, it's very tight. It needs work. Oh wow. Okay. So anyway, you take off the worm gear, tapered pin, and the worm gear stays inside, trapped inside here. Let's see if I'm in frame. And this shaft comes out. Now I can clean this shaft. I can clean both holes, double check everything, start putting it all back together. But that little taper pin, okay, is tapered. There's a fat end and a thin end. And the hole, there's a small end and there's a thin end, or a larger diameter another. It's drilled with two different size holes. Now, I'm going to tell you the story about taper pins. I worked on these speed transducers for the wheels of aircraft, and they were by Goodyear at the time. And the transducer would tell what the speed of each wheel was when it was on the ground, and it fed back to a computer, and it would keep the airplane from going into a skid. Oh yeah, a skid or uneven control. One wheel, the brakes on an airplane, as they wear and that, one side might grip a little harder than the other, so the plane can get into a skid. Well, having this transducer in each wheel and a computer, it makes sure that all, I think there's more than 3 wheels. So anyway, all the wheels are spinning at the same speed, and it compensates, and it helps the pilot land the plane. Well, on the end, it had a very weird, there was a shaft, and had a thing across like this. And a shaft come in here and spun it, and on the aircraft, and there was a taper pin in there. In order to take the armature out of the housing of the transducer, it looks like a motor, you have to have this arm taken off the shaft. Right? It was a taper pin through it, and it was drilled with 4 different size holes. And I sat down and I'm looking at it. I'm like, this is beyond me. I never seen them before. So I go into the machine shop, and we had just moved from Florida, and there's a guy there, and he's heavy, and he's union, and he was being a jerk. I said, look, I have to get this taper pin out of here in order to take this apart and find out what went wrong with it. And it was a soldering connection. Anyway, he's giving me, you got to have a work order number, you got to see my boss, and all this crap. So I go, all right, I go back to my boss. My boss goes, I'll go over and talk to him. So that only made things worse. All right, my boss had a very abrasive way of being. He always threatened union workers. It only made it worse. So anyway, get the work orders, and I basically get a bin back with the armature, or the transducer without that arm on it. And I can see it's a taper pin. I'm like, good thing I didn't start trying to whack it out of there. So I have to do a few of these a week, and it's the same thing with the guy. You got to do a traveler, an order so they can charge, the machine shop can charge our department. And every week going over to see that guy, and he never cracked a smile. He never talked to me. All right. So one day I'm coming into work, and out in the middle of the street is the guy. I'm coming into McGraw-Edison up in West Orange, and he's in the middle of the street running around his car like he's on fire. So I stop my car real quick. I jump out. I ask him, what's the matter? And what happened was he got out to mail a letter and he locked his keys in the car. Now the car is running and he's afraid he's going to get a ticket. So he's all nervous and stuff. I said, he goes, can you stop the engine somehow? This way if a cop comes by, I'll tell him that, you know, the car is dead. I said, all right. So I opened the hood. Back in those days, you didn't have to get in the car to open the hood. You undo the latch, the hood goes up, and he wanted me to take the battery off. I said, it won't stop the car. Please take the battery off. I said, all right. So I go get a tool out of my car. I undo the battery, the positive. I lift it up, and the car don't stop. I said, well, what we got to do now is we take the battery off, and then I lift one of the coil wires. Took the coil wire, car stopped. And I said, stay here, you know, stay cool. And he was soaking wet just from being upset. And I jump in my car, I drive into work, about 6 blocks into work. I'm running through different departments looking for a coat hanger. And, you know, people, I find one, and a woman's complaining to me. I said, look, I can bring a coat hanger back. I said, I got to get a guy in a car. And I take the coat hanger and I go all the way back 6 blocks. I jump out. And it's one of those cars where it's a piece of cake. You just put it in through by the door, and you can either go for the button or the handle. Now in this case, the button had the top that was thicker than the shaft of the button. And you pull it up, guy gets in the car, and he goes to start. I said, look, dude, I got to put the battery back on. And the coil, and he's like, what? I said, remember you told me to take the battery off. He's like, totally forgot. So anyway, I tighten the battery back up. I put the coil wire on. He starts the car. He pulls away without saying. He pulls away and drives into work. He's afraid of being late because he's union. I wasn't union. So he gets into work. So I go over there with one of these things the next day. And this guy's like, I'll have it done for you in 10 minutes. It's just like that. And then it went from that to, I'll show you how to take the pin out. Okay? He says, and this is what I want you to understand. If you went this far, there's a large diameter side on the pin and a smaller side. And then the same with the shaft. You have to look at the little hole in the shaft. Okay? And the worm gear, it might have, the hole on one side might be a little bigger diameter, but that doesn't matter as much as getting the one that goes through the shaft correct. Okay? And then all you have to do is once you get the pin in there, you just tap it in a little bit. Now, you say, well, what did you use to extract the pin, the taper pin? I used, this is a brad, it's a nail. I've always used these over the years on stuff that I have to do. But I want to tell you, this project is basically a rabbit hole. You know, it's not impossible to fix. Okay? But when you buy something, you don't think you have to go this deep into it. Now, I think I'm pretty clear I can clean this up, that gear there, with a toothbrush. And then I got to figure out why it's so tight up in here. I don't have a set of reaming tools. See, where I used to work, we had all this stuff. You had a reaming tool set up for just this bushing. And you'd put it in there and turn it a little bit. And it would, whatever, if it was deformed, you would level it out, carve it out. And then you would double check this to make sure that this isn't bent. Or what's the other thing that can happen to it? Oh, it's got a gaff mark in it, or a scratch. And most of the time, what you do is you take Q-tips and you clean with alcohol. You clean out the bushing blocks. Okay, they're brass bushings. And you clean them out, and that usually fixes it. The grease gets that stiff. That's why, just spray some deox in it. It'll fix it for a while, but then you'll have other problems. These type of things that are almost 100 years old, you got to take them apart, and you got to know what you're doing. Okay, and I've seen stuff dumped back on eBay that someone has fudged or bodged, as Shango says, and I don't. I take things step by step by step, and I try to use all the knowledge that I've learned in my lifetime. And the taper pin was that guy that locked himself out of the car, and he showed it to me. He says there's one side is bigger than the other, and he says that if you tap the bigger side, you're only driving the pin deeper and tighter. He says you go to the small diameter size hole and you tap it with it. We had these punches, or a drift, I think it's a drift pin, a drift punch, or something like that, and you tap it, that pin just drops out. But when you tap it in, it's in there tight, okay? It's a press fit. And then you could also put a dab of Glipdol on the top, so it could come loose, but it can't come out. All right, I think that's it. All right, that's it.